Good evening. I'm David Levine. I'm co-chair of Science Writers in New York. Behind the scenes is my co-chair, Joseph Bonner, who is recording this for YouTube, and he's also did the promotion and organized it and does everything to make me look good. My guest tonight is a friend of mine and a former editor, Lina Zeldovich, who grew up in a family of Russian scientists listening to stories about volcanoes and black holes while eating dinners from her family's organic orchids. She writes, "Since then, I survived a winter in Siberia, a summer in Madagascar, a year at Columbia Journalism School, and I've written for the New York Times, Reader's Digest, Popular Science, Smithsonian, Scientific American, Sierra Club, Atlantic, Newsweek, BBC, NPR, as well as appeared on radio and TV. Along the way, I won 2 awards for stories on sustainability and for covering the science of poop, and decided to pen a book on the subject. Her book is The Other Dark Matter, The Science and Business of Turning Waste into Wealth and Health. Would you like to show the book?
Yes, this is the awesome cover.
The awesome cover. And if you look in the chat, you can get the book just tonight at a 20% discount if you would like to buy it. And I'm sure Lina could figure out a way to autograph it for you if you would like.
Yeah.
So Lina, I read the book. It's fascinating. So how'd you end up writing a book about poop of all subjects?
Well, as you kind of read a little bit in my bio, I had a fairly unconventional upbringing. I grew up in Russia on a small family farm that my grandfather ran, who had 2 degrees, one in engineering and one in agriculture. And he had his own approach to how he managed our farm. Every fall, he would open our cesspool where the toilet output of our home went to all year long, and emptied it onto our farm manually using 2 big buckets and an arched wooden pole to carry it over his shoulders. He would put on a special suit for that, big gloves, big boots, bundle up and proceed. And it was kind of a special occasion because it only happened once a year, like birthday. I was also I could never get close to the pit. My grandma wouldn't let me because she was afraid that I was going to fall in. And the whole thing became so interesting. The grandpa was a special person who was allowed to look at it. Nobody else was allowed to look at it. And even get close. I always wanted to know what's in it. So I kind of followed him around. It stunk, but within about 15 minutes, you'd get used to it. And it was such a weirdly organic thing. He always used to say, you have to feed the earth so the earth could feed us. And this is what I grew up with. To me, it wasn't something you flushed down the toilet. It was something you accumulated and reused because it was almost a treasure. You needed it to live. So imagine my shocker when I grew up and learned that the rest of the world didn't do it. I thought they did, because what would they eat if they just continued throwing it away? So it kind of always bothered me a little bit. Why is it so? It doesn't make sense. There's no the circular structure. It has to go back so the food could grow again. So some 30 years later, I got to actually explore the topic. I won a couple of awards for covering the science of poo, and a couple of my friends said, "Well, why don't you write a book about it?" And I was like, "A book? Well, maybe." One thing led to another. 3 or 4 years later, there's a book.
So, in the beginning of the book, you talk about the history of basically European countries, the Roman Empire, all the the people who actually found that at some point they had to deal with it, and for a long time they didn't deal with it, and then they realized that the things were getting messy. It was they needed better sewage systems. So in a way, it's a story of building a civilization also.
It is a story of building a civilization. I think it's also a story of, human acceptance of its own dark matter, right? Because if you think it, if you look at the history of how people dealt with it, it's, in the early days of human history, when our ancestors were nomadic, it was easy. We just walked across the plains and we stopped wherever we felt like, and, we left our deposit there, and then we continued walking, we left it behind, and the mother nature would just deal with it. Kind of like my grandfather, did. He put it all into compost pits, close it up. A year or two later, it would all fermented, and once he opened it, it would be just garden dirt, rich black garden dirt. That's what Mother Nature did for probably millions of years. The problem started when humans settled and started farming, because they could no longer walk away from their shit. And sure enough, shit began to pile up, and we're still dealing with it, up to today.
I don't think I'll ever think of a Roman in a toga the same way again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
so-
actually, Smithsonian actually run that excerpt, about how ancient Romans went to the bathroom. I got a lot of responses to it. It was a fun piece.
So humans still are not so good at handling, getting rid of waste and getting rid of poop.
Generally, no. But throughout history, there were some cultures who did it better. And in some, in some ways, this cultures were excellent in dealing with it. So, since we're talking about it, I'm going to tell you a story that I sort of, stumbled, across working on the book. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take my storytelling poop hat and put it on, because I just really love it. I'm going to tell you a little story. So once upon a time, in a kingdom far, far away in China, there was an emperor of the Qing dynasty. And one day in 1737, the emperor looked to the southern half of his kingdom and was pleased to see that the cities were thriving and clean, and the farms were fertile and plentiful. Then he looked to the north and saw the complete opposite. The cities were dirty and fields were barren. So the emperor gathered his research crew. They ran some studies, randomized controlled trials, double-blinded, placebo, etc. Wrote it up and told them the reason. So the southern residents diligently collected their excrement from the cities and brought it to the farmers on the countryside to grow food. But the northern residents apparently had not caught up with that wisdom. So the emperor issued a decree that ordered all of the people to collect their excrement, or night soil, as they called it, because the streets in the north are not clean, the treatise said, and the land is filthy. Every household should collect night soil. End of discussion. And treasure night soil as if it were gold. So there were actually reasons why Southerners were better at night soil business. The southern part of China at the time was kind of, confined to I'm going to butcher the name, Hanzhou Bay in the southern part of the country. And that urban sprawl was a big seaport and one of the largest cities on earth at the time. So by the 1820s, there was about 3 million people. And there were two other big cities in the Yangtze River Delta. They had 6 million residents each. On comparison, the municipality of ancient Rome had 500,000 to 1 million people at its peak. So 6 million is about how many people live in Rome today. So all these people had to have their metabolic output removed, and they had to eat something. And so the Southerners organized that circular economy, the circular night soil economy. And the name itself kind of derives from the fact that the fertile muck was gathered at early morning when residents put their chamber pots out the door. So this night soil middlemen, they were called fenfu, they wheeled their carts through the city streets, collecting waste from homes, and in containers that could hold about 60 pounds each. Carts could fit 6 to 10 of them. And those who didn't have carts actually started with buckets, kind of like my grandfather. Even I actually found some really interesting pictures of Chinese peasants at the time, and they have like similar arched poles that they carry stuff in. The operation was so profitable, it lasted into the 20th century. And these men were very efficient. They figured out the daily routes, the best way to collect it and take it out of the city. They sailed it out to the country in gondolas, covered with straw to keep out the stink. They sorted it because not all shit was created equal. The offerings of the elite went to the highest bidder because they had better diets. So they had more undigested nutrients in their poo. The poorer people dung earned less, and the pig and sheep manure sold too, but not as high as human. And I must have, when I was researching it, I was wondering, was there like such a thing as counterfeit poo? Like, would you sell your pig's poo as human poo or whatever? Those were like really interesting topic to think in. The Chinese were actually so good at it. The Chinese and the Japanese were so good at it that American scientist Franklin Hiram King, who once had been the chief of the USDA Department of Division of Soil or something like that, went to China to study their methods and suggested that Americans adopt them. He wrote a book, Farmers for 40 Centuries, because for 40 centuries, the Chinese managed to keep their soils fertile, while in America, that really didn't work, or in Europe. And then in similar thing actually happened in Japan, where the price of night soil was measured in gold. And there was a system of regulations that kind of covered the collection business, delving into minuscule details unimaginable by our standards. For example, if a family rented a house, who owned the output, the tenants or the landlord? By our standards, you'd think that the people who produced it would have been the proud owners of the poo, but nope, it belonged to the landlord, who sold it to the middleman. And if there were more people in the house, let's say 6 versus 4, the price of rent went down because they produced more fertilizer. Farmers fought over who got to collect it and where. I'm going to read from the book again a little bit. In the summer of 1724, 2 groups of villagers erupted in poop wars, fighting over the rights to gather night soil from different parts of Asuka. So cities formed their own organizations to oversee waste disposal and price negotiation, and they raised prices. And then the less fortunate farmers who couldn't collect it were in trouble. And that led to a crime unfathomable by Western standards: stealing shit. By Japanese counsel, it was a very serious crime. So serious that the law enforcement authorities punished it by sending the felons to prison. Now, why were these cultures so good at it? And they didn't have the same inhibitions we have? It's because they had poor soils. Usually that's what happened. If a country or civilization lived in a place where growing produce was hard because there simply wasn't enough nutrients in the soil, they would use every scrap of organic material to put it back. And the organic material they produced themselves was readily available. So it just immediately went in.
Okay, so let me ask just some questions. And okay, people in the audience, if you would like to ask a question, please put them in the Q&A box and not the chat box, because that's for just for Lina and I and Joe, in case there are any technical problems. So my question to you is, there are a lot more people on the earth now.
Yeah.
Are there better ways that we should, how do we get rid of poop? And also, why should we not be getting rid of poop? And so I want to go into the medicinal uses and the human microbiome and all kinds of things. But my first question is, how do we get, how should we be getting rid of it? And how should we be retaining it? And why should we be retaining it at all?
Well, we should not be getting rid of it. That's actually kind of the wrong terminology. We shouldn't be getting rid of it. We should be recovering resources from it. As some of the experts told me, and in fact, the sanitation industry, at least in North America, is very much trying to adopt that language. We don't dispose of waste, or recover resources. Because the resources in our dark matter are actually so plentiful and so versatile, and there's so many things we can do with it, rather than just flushing it down the drain. So there isn't going to be one solution fits all, because the world is very different. In the developing countries, for the most part, there's no centralized sanitation system. There are no pipes. At best, there are latrines, and sometimes there are none. Sometimes there's just bushes. And that's where people go. When all this, fecal matter accumulates, it leaches into drinking water, hence all the epidemics, which we don't have here because we build the pipes. And that's what will dictate the solutions. So in the developing world, there's some really interesting startups that are doing some really interesting work. Again, depending on where they are, they do different things. So in Madagascar, where I actually got to go and spend some time in, a startup called Luwad is organizing this waste collection. They build toilets that they have this sort of cartridges that go in and go out, quite hygienic. Don't smell either. So there's an organized waste collection, like once a week. They go through the neighborhood they serve, they pick this up, and they take it to a sewage plant nearby, where it goes into this massive biodigester, and sits there and biodigests, or ferments for, I think, for 60 days. And what comes out is fertilizer and biogas, because biogas is a natural product of this fermentation, which can be used to boil water, cook food, do other things. Another startup in Kenya does something different. They do a similar waste collection, but then through their own process that they design. They mix it with some other with agricultural waste or sawdust, and they bake it into these briquettes that basically act just as charcoal does. They burn. Again, they cook food, they boil water, and they also reduce deforestation because you don't have to cut trees to turn them into charcoal. So this type of solutions would work well in the developing world. For us, it's probably going to be something different. Like, I don't know if there ever will be a waste collection in New York City that's going to go through our streets and pick up little cartridges along with the regular garbage and recycle that we put out. I don't know, maybe, but probably not so soon. So we're going to do different things, and some of the facilities here are doing it already. So the Washington, D.C. plant, which was my favorite, I really loved, walking through it and kind of like learning all these little details. What they do is they cook their sludge at like 300 degrees Fahrenheit and 6 atmospheres. So it's like 6 times more pressure that you're feeling right now. So at these conditions, so all the pathogens die. Half an hour of this, there's nothing left alive. So this output comes out, goes into a much bigger digester than the one in Madagascar. Actually, I think they have like 4 of them, massive, like humongous, massive cement tanks. And the same thing happens. The output ferments, and then it goes through another process in which all water is extracted, cleaned, released back into Chesapeake Bay at the quality that you can drink. And what's left is dried up. And at the end, there's soil. There's just your classic garden soil that you go and buy in Home Depot. And in fact, you can buy it in Home Depot, or at least some hardware stores in DC. It's called Bloom. And it is as organic as it comes.
Okay, so I want to ask about the medicinal
Sure.
qualities, and why don't you talk about the history of fecal transplants?
So, well, how far in history do I want to go? Do you want to go back 20 years or maybe 500?
Let's go back 20 years.
20 years. Okay.
Okay.
So, So what fecal transplants are, and I think most people who listen to this know it because for the past 5, 7, 8 years it's been making a big splash, is essentially fecal enema. You take poo from a healthy person, you mix it up with some liquid, you do a poop enema, and you put all of that microbial goodness into the person who is sick. Usually it's done for C. difficile because in some people, this disease does not respond to antibiotics at all. People die from it. Something like 25,000 to 30,000 people die
So
from it.
explain what is C. difficile?
So with C. difficile, so it's a bacterial infection that is antibiotic resistant. Why some people get it and others don't is a mystery. In some people, it just sort of takes hold. Usually people pick it up in a hospital after a surgery or some other operation. Something makes them susceptible to it. And it's sort of like antibiotics after antibiotics, and the antibiotics of last resort fail. I think it's vancomycin. And when that fails, there's really nothing else. You don't know what to do. So up until a few years ago, there was basically no cure. People were dying from it. One of the pioneers of this process was this elderly lady, Catherine Duff, who I wrote about in the book. And actually in the very first story I ever wrote about poo, who had it 6 times, nothing was working, and basically she was going to die. And somehow on the internet, her daughter found a description of this process. She had nothing to lose, so she decided to try it. She and her husband did it. I wrote about it in graphic details, how they made this, that they whipped it into a blender, poured it into the enema and all that stuff. One of my editors wrote that he's never read anything like that. It was just completely, wacky, incredible. And lo and behold, it worked. It worked so well that within a day she was back around, walking, driving, and something she couldn't do for a few weeks, if not months. She couldn't get out of bed. And so she decided to launch a fecal transplant foundation and tell the world, people like her, how to cure themselves. She kind of started it all. And then at some point, she actually went on to argue and win the fight with the FDA, who was going to kind of like, close, the door for the fecal transplant. It was, back at the time, it was really strange and weird and unusual type of procedure, and it was making doctors very nervous, or the regulators very nervous. And she won the argument because she basically convinced them that there was no alternative, and until there were no alternative, this procedure should be allowed to be performed on patients in doctors' offices and not at home like she did. So that's kind of like the brief history of fecal transplants.
And how many are done, in the United States each year now?
I don't know. It might be in my book, but I don't remember the number.
Okay.
Yeah.
But is it now pretty accepted as standard practice?
It's not a standard practice. It's still considered, a matter of last resort. Doctors would still have to put people on antibiotics and do it only when everything else fails. Maybe the regulations are changing, but that's when I was writing the book, that was still the status quo.
Okay, so you have a poster which says, I don't know if people can see it, but it says, maybe not. It says, save lives, donate your stool.
Oh yeah. What page is that? Does it tell you? I'll show people in the book.
No, it's page 2. It's at the end, page 224.
Page 224. Actually, I'm right there here. Let's see if this will work any better. So
I think it's a lot better.
yeah. So this is a poster in the Open Biomes office, the company that creates this fecal transplants. They're based in Massachusetts, in Boston. So yeah, I'm sorry. What question did you want to ask me?
Well, I just want to say, so people get paid to donate their stool?
Yes, people get paid to donate their stool. I think it's not a lot of money. You're not going to get rich in it. Something like $40, I think. Mostly for their time, because it does take time, to go there and whatnot. And also, People who do this have to go through a battery of tests to make sure they're super healthy. So it does take, time. So it's
Okay.
a
Okay.
complex.
Are there other medicinal uses?
For poo, no, that is the main one. But the thing is that it um it changes, because it changes your microbiome. It has the potential to cure not only an antibiotic resistant infection, but other things that are caused, other diseases that are, or health issues that are caused by your microbiome not being in the optimal, state. So it can quite likely cure other infections. There were other studies done that suggest that, for example, people on chemotherapy do better when they have this fecal transplants done while they're on chemotherapy. There are talks that some autoimmune diseases might be, if not curable, then at least better manageable by changing, people's microbiome that way. There were even conversations that maybe it can play a role in autism, and there was a study that tried this, but it didn't go very far. I don't remember exactly, what they said. Oh, allergies. There are people investigating allergies. How you can treat allergies, like lethal allergies to peanuts, if you change people's microbiome. So it's kind of like a very actively developing area of science.
So the microbiome is a very hot topic now. I've read that, there's a lot of serotonin. I've read about mental illnesses. There's also thoughts about Parkinson's disease.
Yeah.
And when did it, so tell me about, when did the microbiome started to be seriously looked at?
Seriously looked at?
Looked at for illnesses? Because most people think, mental illnesses, starting
I don't know.
For any illnesses.
For any illnesses. Okay, so the brief history of microbiome. Oh God, you open a Pandora's box.
Okay.
So the microbiome started being talked about in America, I think around 10 years ago, maybe a little bit before that. I can tell you that in Russia, it was no news. I grew up knowing about it. Like when I was a kid, my cousin, also named Lina, because we all named after the same Jewish relatives who were dead, had some kind of she was older, so she had some kind of intestinal disease, and they diagnosed her with intestinal dysbiosis. When I came to America, nobody even knew what it was. But in Russia, that's how they approached it, and they treated a lot of intestinal diseases by restoring what they call intestinal flora. They didn't have probiotics per se, but they had fermented foods, yogurts, the Russian version of kimchi, and things like that. And I was kind of shocked that like, for example, in 1990s, none of that existed in America. There's a reason for that. The scientists who first sort of stumbled upon or maybe invented the concept of microbiome was a Russian scientist named Elia Machnikov, and I wrote about him about 10 years ago when microbiome became popular. So he did his research in the early 1900s, and he actually discovered some of the bacteria that's supposed to live in our stomach, such as lactobacillus, some of those basic things that that we call probiotics today. I don't remember if he called them probiotics, but he sort of had. I actually don't remember exactly what name he had for them. It's also in the book. And his whole take on it was that there's this conglomerate of bacteria living in your stomach, and if you get them into the right combination and the right ratios, it will protect you. It will protect you from disease. It will protect you from aging, and it will keep you in good mental health too. Unfortunately, he lived very well. He actually did have a long life, but he died around 1916. And antibiotics were discovered shortly after in 1928. And what happened was probiotics take time to work, and sometimes they don't necessarily work well. Antibiotics work so well and so fast that they completely overshadowed probiotics. And this is what we ran with for almost a century. So that's a quick.
Well, I also interviewed someone who cured her husband using phage therapy, which she Googled by finding that it's used in Russia, but it's not widely used here.
I know a lot about phages,
Okay. So I'd like to turn to so this is your first book.
Yes.
And what's it like, going from a person who writes articles to writing a book? What was the big difference? What was the biggest difference for you?
The biggest difference? It's just that the deadline was really far in the future.
Okay.
About a year up in the future. Other than that, the process, I don't know if the process really differed that much, because when you write a proposal, you outline your chapters and you pretty much tell your publisher what you're going to write before you even sell the book. So when the book got sold and I had this moment of panic, I was like, oh my God, how am I going to write this? I don't know how to write 80,000 words. How do I do this? And then I opened my proposal and I looked at my list of chapters and the descriptions of them, and I went, it's all there. I'm just going to follow the script. The only other difference was that feature stories, I'd write a lot of feature stories. Feature stories these days run from 2,500 words, 1,500 words to 3,500 words, right? My chapters were a little bit longer. Some 3, some 4, some 5,000 words. And when you have 5,000 words to kind of like put it all together in your head from, your sources, all that research, and then like spit it out in a well-flowing fashion is a little bit harder. But I think in the book, it works a little bit differently too, because with features, you don't want your people to abandon the story. They probably won't come back to it. With the book, if people need to take a break, they put a placeholder, they go do something else, they come back to it, I don't know, tonight or 2 days later. So you can deal with this longer word count in different ways. You can put more descriptions, you can put more scenery, you can put more humor and stuff like that. So that was my process.
Did you enjoy writing a book?
Yes, absolutely.
So do you plan to write another book?
I have a second book to write.
You have a second book to write. Okay.
Second book to write, yes.
And okay, so what was how long did you have to write the first book?
So it was about 15 months, a little bit less than 15 months. And that is enough, but it's also kind of tight. If you need to do traveling for this book or just like plan on some emergencies, it's not enough. I think, like generally I'd like to have more.
So, but I imagine also during the pandemic, there were also other challenges.
Well, I finished writing the book in 2019. Okay. So I luckily didn't have to travel anywhere. Okay. But there were some other, funny things. So the University of Chicago Press is an academic publisher. So as part of that, the book has to be reviewed, had to be reviewed by 4 academics. And that took a lot of time and created some really funny moments. Not everybody appreciated my humor in the book. And some people also, there's one person who wrote, everything is anonymous. I have no clue who read what and who wrote what. But one person wrote to me, wrote a response that I was terribly inconsistent with my terms describing the same subject, the same substance. I used the words poo, poop, crap, excrement, dung, waste, whatever, describing the same thing. I should just pick one and stick with it.
So here's a question from one of our listeners. Do you take probiotics? And if so, what type?
I do, but not all the time. Only when I have, like, if I have a stomach virus or whatever, yes, absolutely. I have my own special regimen, and I swear by it. It works. I never travel without it, especially in places like Madagascar. You know, antibiotics and probiotics. Take one, then take the other. Which one I take? So there is a brand out there. It's called Garden of Life. If you Google it, you're going to find quite a few. They all differ slightly. Read what kind of bacteria are in there. It's not just, acidophilus. There's a whole bunch of them that are supposed to live in your intestines. While like this one, it was recommended to me, I think 20 years ago by a doctor 20 years ago when I had some medical problems. And the person who created this brand almost died from Crohn disease, but he zeroed in on this formula, and he didn't die. It was actually an interesting story. Maybe one day I'll end up writing it. So that's my to-go brand, Garden of Life.
Now, are fecal transplants being used in patients with Crohn's disease?
I think there's studies. I don't think they're being used, as a standard of care.
Okay, so
But phages are being used in a study for Crohn's disease patients that I know.
Okay. I was also intrigued by the, with the discovery that there is medical use and other uses, that there are startups that are really. So what are some of the who are some of the startups? Who are the people making money off the off this?
Of fecal transplants?
Just in general, of recycling poop, fecal transplants in general. Who's making money?
I don't know if people are making money per se. So the Open Biome is the one and only stool bank that does this, and so they have an FDA approved new method of how they create it, and they follow it to the T. Every batch is labeled and checked and whatnot. I don't think they're making a lot of money. In fact, they very much strive to make it affordable because some insurances still won't cover it. And I don't remember, I think at the time I was writing a book, if you really needed it, it was something like $1,500. And if nothing else works, it is affordable. So they can't be making a lot of money from it. There are, again, I don't remember the names, and also in 3 years, the players might have changed. There are companies who are striving to, who working to make kind of similar bacterial formulations that are not derived from poop, but like cultivated, that way you sort of like remove, the yak factor and maybe some stigma and whatnot. But I don't think they're making money yet either. I don't think they have approved therapies yet. There's a lot of potential. They all kind of like fighting with each other who's going to be the first to get to the finish line, kind of like with the vaccines. But I don't think anybody is making millions on this yet.
So the FDA does not regulate probiotics, do they?
No.
So if I go to my neighborhood Walgreens or CVS, how do I know I have a good product?
You don't.
You don't.
Like you absolutely don't. And that's why, like I said, I stuck with the same product for 25 years because it worked. Because it contains a lot of different strains, which we all need. It works on me. Worked on my kids when they were sick. I trust it. This is what I stick with. But no, you absolutely don't know.
Well, that's true of vitamins as well. So
honestly, it's hard to know what you're getting, even when you're buying a prescribed medicine with prescriptions, because if that medicine is, made in China or India, there's no very good oversight. You once hosted a book reading for the author who wrote about it, The Bottle of Lies, one of my favorite books.
Catherine Even, yeah.
Exactly.
They're kind of scary every time I get a generic, but what else can
I know, but not a lot of insurances will cover non-generic brand names. So it's same thing. You don't know what you buy.
So are countries getting better at waste management and better at using it for different purposes?
So I would say here, like in America, from what I saw when I was reporting on the book, yes. In Canada, yes. I think in Europe too. With it, but just like with everything, it sort of comes and goes, if there is money that you can invest in sanitation gets better, regardless of the country, or the continent, right? If there's no money, it slowly deteriorates. And actually, this was one thing I really wanted to change with this book, because experts told me people would invest in clean water coming to their house. Nobody wants to invest in wastewater. It's always, a problem child. Nobody wants to throw money in it because everybody feels you're just, throwing money down the toilet. Nobody wants to invest in toilets. But the thing is, it's a resource. This is what I wanted to change with the book. I wanted, by profiling all those different startups and large companies that convert sewage into fertilizer, energy, even crude oil, that's the latest and hottest tech. I wanted to show people that how incredibly versatile this resource is. I wanted, people who invest in these things, entrepreneurs, innovators, whatever, to kind of start thinking like the Chinese and Japanese night soil collectors. There's money and shit up for grabs. Use it, put it to good use.
So what is your hat? What is your
renewable resource?
What is your hat made of?
My hat made of?
Yeah.
It's probably of some, cottony polyester-ish material. I actually don't know. This is just a colorful poop hat. So, but why?
I'm just curious to describe it as a poop hat. So I was just kind of curious. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I actually bought it while I was working on the book. I think it was 2018. It was actually the holiday season, so I was buying gifts in the children's place, for like nieces, nephews, kids, and whatnot. And I saw this hat, and I decided to buy it for myself. I didn't think any girls in the family would want it, and you can't imagine how hot of an item it was. They all wanted it. And I said, nope, this is my hat. This is my inspirational hat. I'm going to keep it for the book. Sorry. I should have bought like 5 of
them. So do you predict that over the next 10 years that fecal transplants will be everywhere in the world and that there will be much more uses for them?
I think what's going to happen in the next 10 years with fecal transplants is that they're going to standardize it somehow, and it's likely not going to be in the form of transplants. I think they're going to figure out how to grow the right bacteria. They might, I don't know. It's hard to tell. They still haven't so far, but I think they might. At least they're going to, make a push for it, because it makes the agency, the regulatory bodies, feel better knowing what's in it, right? And exactly what it's composed of, and knowing that it's also, clean and purified, and you're only getting like this bacteria, this, I don't know, 12 strains of this bacteria, but not some other things that might be even in healthy people's, poo. I don't know. I don't think I'm the right person to make this prediction. I don't even know if there is a right person to make this prediction, because this type of science
let's talk about now. So let's say, you're having problems, they're not being cured by your doctor.
Yeah.
How do you even go about, who do you contact to try and get a fecal transplant?
You find a doctor who can do it, And I haven't checked recently, but you used to be able to do it on Catherine Duff's website and her foundation, the Fecal Transplant Foundation. She used to list all the doctors who do it. And either they contact the open biome or you contact the open biome. And, with these two variables, you can have it. Moreover, these days and age, open biome also makes this fecal transplants in capsules. They just, they have this machine that fills out little capsules and closes, and they come in bottles. So you can take them by mouth if you don't want to take them the other way.
Okay, so we have a question. Is there any particular use for pet waste, which is often readily available to pet owners?
Yeah, let's see. It can be used exactly the same way. It can be biodigested, it can be biodegraded, it can be turned into fertilizer, energy. It's really not that different from human poop. I don't talk about pet poop in the book, but I do talk about poultry poop, for example, because it also generates a huge amounts of manure, and they're in Israel, there's a group that converted it into sort of like a form of coal. And you can cook with it too, or you can just throw it into like an energy producing plant.
Okay. So you finished the book in 2019. What have you been working on since then?
Well, I've been revising the book. It took a couple of not huge revisions, but some. I've been working on a book proposal for the second book, which also took some time. And now I have a contract and a deadline, and I have to figure out how to write one book while still marketing the other.
Okay. Do you want to give us any hint about what this book's about?
Yes, I can. You could probably also guess. It's about phages. It's about the history of phages, which also began about 100 years ago. And I think I have a really cool story to tell.
Yeah. Well, I hope you'll come back and talk to us. A person did write about phage therapy and how she saved her husband.
Yeah.
They were both doctors, so it's very, very interesting.
And she has a center in California. Yeah, I listened to that talk because at that time, I don't remember, was it finishing the proposal or it was already finished and my agent was pitching it. So I was very much into the topic. So, and I read her book too.
So you were an editor.
Yeah.
And how's it feel to be a writer and getting criticism from an editor?
Good. If the editor is good, usually if your editor is good, and I think I was lucky because I did have a fair amount of good editors in my life, the story comes out better. And sometimes it comes out quite a bit better. Because they sort of look at it from a different perspective, from like, I don't know, maybe bird's view, while I'm sitting here like all lost in facts and trying to piece them together into coherent narrative. And then they look at the narrative and go, change this, change that, re-report this and that. If at the end the story comes out worse than what you think you started with, either you shouldn't work with this editor or this editor isn't a good editor. That's kind of how I think. But it so far it didn't happen to me very often. I also really love writing, and I don't mind investing more time into a story if I feel it's going to come out better.
Okay, so I don't have any more open questions, so I think we're going to end it here. Next week, I'm going to be talking about how the COVID vaccines were invented. The writer Brendan Burrell had a year to do it, short timeline, and it's gotten some good buzz. So that will be on December 8th. And I am hoping to do one on the new variant, but right now, the person said, let's hold off a week or two and see what happens. So I will let you know if that happens. But I want to thank Lina Zeldovich, who is a great writer, but also an excellent editor, because she's been my editor, and she did make my writing better.
Oh, that's good. No, thank you.
Yeah. And not always willingly sometimes, but always better. And I want to thank her for spending time with us. And I want to hope everyone had a nice Thanksgiving. And I hope next time I speak to you, we can do this actually in person. So anyway, great talking to you. Thank you for spending some time with us. And I want to thank Joe Bonner, who will be putting this up on YouTube, and for people who missed it. And again, Lina, thank you, and my regards to your family, and congratulations on publishing your first book.
Thank you.
Take care. Good night.
Bye.